Dutra.
Thank you. It's lovely to see everybody here tonight. I'd like to thank Keith Althouse, the staff at the library, Tricia Ford Gardner, who unfortunately, the poor thing, had to go to Maui. So we'll forgive her for not being here on this horrible night. It was cold. And Galen Malacote, who did the posters, and Peter for setting up the audio-visual. And thank you all for coming, friends, neighbors, any relatives. My granddaughter, Olivia Dutra, is here helping me, giving her a taste of what it's like to be a published author, because it's not just about writing, is it? It's trying to get the books out there. Of course, if you can write, but if nobody reads them, then what good is it? Anyway, I hope you're not going to be disappointed, and I didn't get you, I'm not going to read tonight. I thought that if you want to read the book, you can pick it up and read it yourselves. Because that would be pretty boring, I think, if I just stood up here and read. So instead, I thought I will talk to you about why I write. I find that writing is an adventure for me. It's planning, mapping things out. It's going to your destination. It's meeting new people along the way, my characters. And it's also sometimes bumping into old friends and old characters. Just recently, I was looking at the Provincetown Historic Preservation webpage for information about what was going on in Provincetown in the late 1930s. And I came across an article, it was in the Provincetown Log, which was not the Advocate, and it was a different publication entirely, but it was a newsprint. And the underneath it said, "All the dirt that's fit to dig." And I think it was like a gossip column. And it was, yes, very cute. And the heading was July 1938. And I started looking through it, and I came across this article that the Art Association had just had a concert, and the guest bassoonist was a woman named Anne de Gouchard. Well, I went, Anne de Gouchard? Oh my God, I knew her. I took care of her. When I was the visiting nurse in Provincetown, I went to her house. She was quite elderly and she was quite frail, and she was losing her memory a little bit. But she was a very pleasant woman. We talked a lot about music. She was the very first woman in the Boston Symphony Orchestra. I know, and she had a house on Conwell Street in Provincetown. And I remember her to this day. She was, quite lively and sprite. She played not only the bassoon, but she played the oboe, she played the clarinet, she played the trumpet, and she played the piano. And so I happened to see an article, and it said that Amadeus, the musical about Mozart, was playing in the theater downtown. So I asked her if she wanted to go, and she said sure. So I wound up taking her to this movie. And we sat through the whole movie, and when we came out, I said to her, "How did you like it?" And she said to me, "He wasn't like that at all." As if she knew him, And it was like, I was a little taken aback by it, but I said, "Well, did you enjoy it?" And she did not. She said that he was not like that at all. She was adamant about that. And it was just a few months later that she actually passed away. And when she did, I called her nephew, who lived in New Jersey, and asked him if I could buy her piano. And to this day, I have that piano in my house. So when I saw that article in 1937 about Anne de Gouchard, I was so moved. It brought back all these memories to me about this wonderful musician. So for me, writing is an adventure, like life. Life is an adventure. And I've had many great adventures in my life. I've done some really wonderful experiences. Got to canoe 100 miles up the Allagash. I rode to the pyramids on horseback. I climbed Holy Meteori with friends, said prayers up there at the monastery. I've watched fireworks in Istanbul. I've climbed mountains in Mexico and sailed in the Caribbean. But of all those things that I've done, going fishing with my husband had to be some of the best and finest adventures that I've ever had. One of the time, many years ago, David and I had a boat called the Wildflower. It was a 42-foot Novi-type boat that he rebuilt. He built that whole boat, really. And he went dragging and scalloping and clamming and all kinds of fishing with it. And so this one day in 1975, he had it tied on the float next to the Hindu, where the Hindu still ties today, down on McMillan Pier. And he had just rebuilt the engine. It was a labor of love. It was, he was greasy and dirty, and he had worked on it for a whole week, and he needed to take it out for a little test run. But before he did that, there was a couple of people, a husband and wife, who came down the gangway and came onto the float and started talking to David about fishing and boats and, just, like tourists do, asking lots of questions. And so David he's always patient, and he talked to the people, and then finally he says, I got to take this boat out for a little test drive. He said, do you want to come? And they said, well, sure, why not, So they came aboard. David turned over some fish boxes, and they sat in the stern, and off we went, untied the lines, out toward the point, past the breakwater, and out toward Wood End. We were coming along Wood End, and David was watching the dials and listening to the sound of the engine. And then I said to him, David, what's that on the water over there? It looks like a fin. And he said, picked up his binoculars, and he looked, and he said, take the wheel. So I took the wheel, and he said, head for that fin. I headed for the fin, and he went up on the bow, and he untied this big pink ball that he had up there, and he untied the harpoon that he had tied up next to the thing. And he said, when I tell you, he said, take the boat out of gear. So I said, okay. So we go up toward the fin. I'm getting closer, and he said, take it out of gear. So take it out of gear, and we kind of coasted right up, and he stood up, and he got up on the bow with that harpoon, and he went boom like that, and that harpoon sank deep. That barb went really deep into that fish, and all of a sudden, all hell broke loose. The line started coming out of the very rapidly. The big pink ball, he took it and threw it over the side, and he screamed at all three of us, don't take your eyes off that ball. So there's this big ball, and it's going through the water. David comes back around, he grabs the wheel, and he turns it, and off we go. We're chasing this ball. So all of a sudden, the ball disappears. Boom, underwater. And we're all saying, uh-oh. And David's saying, shit, what happened to the ball, And so he knew it went down with the fish. So he says, keep an eye out. And all of a sudden it pops back up out of the water, and it's going through the water again, and we're following the ball. And then it goes down again, and, everybody's like, oh my God, it's gone. So we're all like excited and lots of adrenaline pumping. And he said, keep a good lookout. Make sure if you see this ball coming, let me know where it is. And, so everybody's scanning, looking. All of a sudden it pops back up. There it is. He turns the wheel, and he starts heading for that big pink ball again. Well, we had these two people on the stern. They thought they were going for a 20-minute ride. 4 hours later. 4 hours. These people sat very patiently. What could they do? There was no, stopping and letting them off. And David wasn't about to give up this fish. So we followed that ball around Cape Cod Bay till that fish started to tire, and you could tell it wasn't, going as fast, and it wasn't going under as often, and so then he pulled up next to the ball when it kind of stopped in the water, and he started pulling it in, and he could feel the line, and when the line would get tight, and he knew the fish was going again, he threw that ball back over, and off we went again, and that went on for 4 hours. He would be pulling it in. He was exhausted by the end of the day because he'd pull in the line, he'd feel the tightness on it. He didn't want to pull that barb. If he had pulled too tight or put it around a winch, we'd have lost the fish. And this was quite a day for us. So anyway, we finally did manage to get the boat next to the fish, brought the fish up, all the line is in there. He tied a line around the tail of the tuna, it was a tuna, and he put a line through the mouth, and it came right up next to the boat. And all 4 of us leaned over the side, and we looked at this monstrous fish, but it was beautiful. It was every color of the rainbow and every color you could imagine. It was gorgeous, and we watched it die, and it was so heart-wrenching. It was exhilarating, but at the same time, it was heart-wrenching, and for all of us. And it was very emotional. And we had been screaming and crying. It was quite the day. We finally made it back to the wharf, brought the fish in, said goodbye to the people. I never saw them again. I never heard another word from them. These people who went out for a 20-minute ride and had probably one of the most exciting days of their lives, because I know for me it was exciting, and for David it was a total thrill. The fish weighed out at over 1,000 pounds. Yeah, it was a big fish, and but we talked about it later, and David said he'd never go for another tuna fish. It was too sad to see this huge, beautiful animal, so we never did. He never went for another tuna fish. He did a lot of dragging. He did a lot of scalloping, and I fished a lot with him. So there were lots of stories like that. But that tuna fish was probably one of the most exciting adventures that I have been on. And there's been lots of them. Fishing was a big part of our lives, and so we I missed that part of it. So anyway, getting back to the books, I thought I would just tell you a little bit. The first book, Nautical Twilight, is about our family's involvement in the fishing industry. There are lots of stories like that about the tuna fish. That story of the tuna fish will actually be in one of my next books. I am working on 2. One is about the sailboat that we had called the Arethusa, which we sailed from Maine to North Carolina, and then we were 300 miles offshore, got caught in a hurricane, and a couple of days later the Coast Guard accidentally sunk it. So that was another adventure, and I'm writing a book about that one. And then I'm also working on the 3rd in the series of Chief Crowley murder mysteries that take place in Provincetown in 1938, 38, 37, 39. I chose that period of time because it's pre-war. I used to listen to a lot of Glenn Miller and wonderful old music that my mother was always playing. She listened to, Tommy Dorsey and Ella Fitzgerald and, Bing Crosby and all these wonderful musicians back in the day. And I even have her albums still. So when I'm thinking that I need to get myself in the mood, I'll go back and listen to some of those old albums, and it's amazing how they're upbeat, they're fun. We were coming out of the Depression in the United States. There was lots going on. It wasn't all roses. It wasn't all a bed of roses. There was a lot of poverty, a lot of problems in the workplace, and in Europe there was terrible things going on at the same time. But I found a booklet in my mother-in-law's garage that came from the first anniversary ball in Provincetown that the Provincetown Fishermen's Association held. And that was in January of 1937. And I started looking through this. And I was looking at the names. I was looking at the businesses. They had nicknames for everybody. They had boat names, of course. It just took me. It just grabbed me, and I loved that era. And I said, this is it. I'm going to write about this period of time. Of course, I know Provincetown really well. Came to Provincetown to live permanently in 1968, and then I never left. And I've worked in Provincetown in all different capacities. My first job was at the surf club, waiting on tables. But I was also a registered nurse at the time, so I didn't stay that way long. I wound up working at the Cape End Manor, and then I worked in doctor's offices. I worked at the rescue squad. I worked at everywhere, the home health agency. That's where I met Andy Gouchard. I worked there for a number of years with Alice Foley. That was before they had visiting nurses. Provincetown had its own visiting nurses. It was called Provincetown Home Health. And I met a lot of the old-timers. And I often tell people that between the visiting nurse, the rescue squad, the doctor's offices, and then where I wound up was at the school. I retired out of the school in 2006. I think it was 2006, I'm not sure. Anyway, I think I've been... Between all of those places in Provincetown, I've been in every house in Provincetown in one capacity or another. Not everyone, but almost everyone. Of course, so that's why I had to write about Provincetown, because I know it so well, and I knew the characters and the people. And lots of the characters in the book, I use the names of people that I knew, but I kind of take them in different directions, so I try not to embarrass anybody. But I did recently, I was selling books at the Year-Rounders Festival in Provincetown with Peter Cook, and he said to me, he said, do you think you could use my name in one of your books? So I said, do you want to be a good guy or a bad guy? So he said, geez, I never thought about that. So I will have to plug him in somewhere. I don't know if I have anything else to say. I mean, I have lots to say, but I just was reading a book recently by, I can't think of his name. It's called The Word is Murder. And I can't think of his name. But anyway, he said, besides writing, what authors like to do most is talk about their books. So I won't bore you anymore. I'll just tell you that I love to write. It takes me away. Sometimes I sit at my desk and I'll look up and the hours have passed and I say, oh my goodness. Or I'll pick up what I've written the day before and I don't remember writing it. And that's it's like a treat, because it's like, it's like, wow, this isn't bad. Of course, you need a lot of help. Editors, very important, and friends are very important. And so I'll keep writing, you keep reading, or write, and does anybody have any questions? I'd be glad to, yeah, hi.
I just finished both of the mysteries and really liked them.
Oh, thank you.
My question is that you do use names that are the names of real people.
Yes.
And I'm wondering if you've ever had any reaction from people about that.
Mostly, they're all good. People love seeing their name in print because I don't use them as the people were. I use them in different contexts altogether. But I had one woman from Nautical Twilight. She called me up one day and she said, I think I deserve part of the profits on your book. And I said, really? I had written, she was 90-something years old at the time. She's since passed away, but Marie Santos was her name. And I used her name, and it was true. Everything in that Nautical Twilight is true. So people can't really come back at me because, and I even said to her, well, it was a true story. She said, well, I deserve part of the credit, or she wanted part of the money. I said, well, look, I make $3.25 on every book I sell. So if I give you like 10%, maybe I'll give you 30 cents a book. But she was, she just was the only person that really actually gave me a hard time about it. And Marie. Yeah.
Yeah, we live in Truro, but we had a place in Provincetown for a number of years, and lived next door to actually Flyer Santos.
Oh, yeah.
So, of course, when I was reading your first book about Marie Santos, I thought, gee whiz.
What if it's related?
Yeah, but I think his wife was Irene, actually.
Yeah, no, it's not.
Yeah. So did you, we were struck by, talking to him about the influence of the Portuguese culture in Provincetown.
Yes.
And, is that something that you talk about or can think about in your books or not?
Yes, it's very close to my heart. My husband was 100% Portuguese. And although he didn't speak the language, he was Portuguese. He was stubborn, opinionated. He always spoke his mind. Yes, Portuguese is very close, and it's one of my strongest desires is to be able to go to Portugal. His family was from Lisbon, and the other side of his family was from the Azores and St. Michael, San Miguel. So that's on my bucket list. Another adventure. My granddaughter wants me to take her. So see, I'm telling all these people I'm going to take you, so I guess I'll have to.
You have to write about it.
Oh yeah, of course we'll write about it. I've, all my life I've kept journals. All my travels, even, years ago before I came to Provincetown, I found journals that I had kept of travels mostly and people that I met. So it's, I've always liked to write. But I wound up a nurse, so who knows?
Yeah. Well, just one other thing about Flyer, he was very emphatic about the fact that he was from the Azores, not Portugal.
Yes.
He talked a lot about the Azorean. And is that in your writing, or is that something different from what you might see in Lisbon or Portugal?
In one of the books, Fisherman's Ball, the fellow that washes up on the beach before he dies, I shouldn't tell you that, but in case you haven't read it, he's from the Azores. And so I talk a little bit about that. I talk a little bit about Portuguese influence in the communities in all my books. And there's always fishing involved, always, because it was so much a part of my life that, I was married for 45 years, something I think, and all that time we had fishing boats. So there's got to be a fisherman. He's, this next one I'm writing, it's called Watch for the Crow. That's the next one that's coming. I hope it doesn't take 4 years to write, though. I think it took me 4 years because David got sick in the middle of it. I started writing the last one while we were in North Carolina living aboard the Richard and Arnold. And then my husband got sick, and it took me quite a while to get it finished. But the next one, I've already got it planned out, mapped out, like another adventure. I can see where I'm going with it. I know the chief is still going to be the chief, but there are other characters, and there's definitely a fisherman. And all the books, I take you out fishing, so, yeah. Any other questions?
You're going to stay in Provincetown with all the stories.
Oh, I have to.
Yeah.
Well, I don't know. We've had some great adventures. Who knows? Maybe Chief Crowley will have to go, off somewhere. He'll get involved in something else. I don't know, but that's in the future, if I live long enough. Keep going.
When you start a book, you already know the end?
Basically, yeah. I know where I'm going with it. Yeah, I know who the bad guys are. I know why. I've got it pretty well mapped out in my head before I put it down. I use index cards, and I put all the people, and I put out all their characteristics, what they like to do, how big they are, what they drive, everything about them, where they went to school, everything. And I keep these index cards so that I can refer back to them and make sure I don't make any mistakes about, Chief Crowley drives a 32 Chevy. I want to make sure I know that's every time I say that or write it, that's what it is. And I have it pretty well in my head already. I know what it's about, and I know where I'm going. But it's always, for me, full of surprises, and I always try to bring in new characters and work with the old ones, and so we'll see where it goes. Heads off, and then just like that fishing trip we took, we went out for a 20-minute ride, and you never know where you're going to wind up.
What did you have to do with the tuna?
Oh, we sold it. Yeah, we sold it. And back in those days, I think we made 75 cents a pound. It was pitiful. All of that, that whole day, all of that work, and while he was, pulling in the tuna fish and running around the boat, he was listening to the engine and tapping on the dials because he had just rebuilt this engine. And thank goodness it didn't stall out there, or we didn't spring a leak, or, it would have been disastrous with this tuna heading off in the wrong direction. But it all worked out, and it was quite an adventure. It was one of the many.
So, Judy, the way you just described gathering information and recording it and doing all of that, did you develop your own process, trial and error on your own, or did you do it in a lot of different ways?
Well, I used to keep notebooks, and then I've done a lot of reading, and I've taken online courses. I've taken courses at, up Cape on writing, and I've read a lot of books on writing, how to write, how to bring things together, how to make a work of mystery, and I pick out the things that work for me. And I like the index cards. When I did the Nautical Twilight, I printed out the whole book, and then I laid the chapters out, chapter by chapter, and I looked at them and I said, that doesn't belong there. That's that piece of paper should be in this chapter, So I started moving things around that way, so that it would be. And then I divided it up into family, squid, friends fishing with us, and I made cohesive chapters that way.
Like storyboards.
Yes, yes, yeah. But I like the index cards because I can go through them and I say, well, how tall is Crowley again? I know. For me, Chief Crowley is a cross between Tom Selleck and David Dutra. I don't know how you get that, but those are my guys. Chief Crowley?
Well,
he's 6 foot.
yeah,
And David was like 5'10", yeah.
So he's somewhere.
No, he's somewhere in there. But I mean, their emotions, their, sensitivities about certain things, the way they talk to people. David was always such a gentleman. He really was a gentleman. And I like to bring that out in Crowley. But I also like the look and the mannerisms of that macho Tom Selleck. So, but you can draw your own conclusions. You can see him however you want. Yeah.
Judy, are there any like what you call local historians now that you go to? I mean, there was like Betty Groom.
I know.
There was Clive Driver, and there was George Bryant.
For certain things, yes, I know. I used the Provincetown History Preservation. They have quite a title. I also have used the Provincetown Fishermen's Association, some of the fishermen. And I've also used the Portuguese Festival Committee because they're very knowledgeable and they keep an ongoing history of Provincetown. I wrote an article for them for their booklet coming out this year, and I talk to them frequently. I ask questions, and when I want to get something, tightened up, or if I need a sounding board about something like Susan Avalar, I talk about the Hindu, and I wanted to make sure that I had all the everything about the Hindu correct. So Susan Avalar's father, of course, he ran the Hindu, Captain Avalar, Justin. He was, you worked with him. Yeah, back in the day. Yeah. Well, it's such a lovely evening this evening. I think that you guys probably have plans to be out in this beautiful spring evening, walking, doing your promenade. Any other questions? Yeah. Well, thank you all for coming. I do appreciate it. It's always fun. Good to see everyone. Thank you again very much. No.